who had sailed with Kidd as a privateer. Burgess was recruited out of retirement to sail to Madagascar with goods for the pirates. Clothing, liquor, naval supplies, and ammunition were the imports of choice on St. Mary's. These goods were in turn exchanged for slaves, one of Madagascar's only exports. Another employee of Phillips was the pirate Adam Baldrich, who was for a while one of the pirate kings of St. Mary's. While his title did not entitle Baldrich to rule in a monarchical way, it did make him the #1 fence for items stolen by pirates, a very lucrative position. Baldrich bought goods at attractive prices and put them aboard ships to Frederick Phillips. He would also serve as a travel agent, assisting retiring pirates in making their return passage to England or the North American colonies. With the pirate King Baldrich on St. Mary's and Burgess sailing back and forth to New York, the aristocratic Phillips had his own trading empire. The pirate Thomas Tew was also in his employ, and Phillips did little to hide his role in piracy. One of his ships that sailed the Indian Ocean for slaves and contraband, and to engage in piracy, was named the Frederick. 17 Skeletons in the Closet 85, but life would not always stay simple for Phillips. After Kidd's arrest, Bellomont was on the prowl for pirates, and he was not above turning on acquaintances like Phillips. When Bellomont became aware that 200 pirates were being given passage to New York from Madagascar on a Frederick Phillips' own ship Com-18, he decided money was thicker than friendship. The fee charged to each ex-pirate was an expensive £50, but presumably that was the tip of the iceberg of their personal wealth. The men were most likely loaded with booty intended to provide for them in their retirement years. Luckily for both Phillips and his cargo, Bellomont would not survive long enough to intercept it. Next, Phillips's #1 captain, Burgess, was captured at sea. It was the second time for Burgess, who had previously survived arrest, being pardoned by Bellomont. But that was before the backlash against piracy started by the British East India Company, the arrest of Kidd. This time Burgess was brought to London, where he was condemned to death. To his credit, Phillips sent to London his son Adolf, who worked for 3 years, to save Burgess from suffering the same fate as Kidd. Burgess returned to sea, and later lived out his retirement years in London as a consultant for the British East India Company. Unlike the Livingstons and the Gardiners, the Phillips family's power and wealth was divided after the Revolution. They had started in the colonies as part of the landed aristocracy of the Hudson Valley, which entitled them to the patroon system that granted lands to favourites of the royalty back in England. Pelham Manor for Thomas Bell, Phillipsburg to the Phillipses, Morrisania to Lewis Morris, Cortlandt Manor to the Van Cortlandts. The families in control of these extremely large tracts leased farmland to tenant farmers, who were often kept in poverty and indebted to their land. In 1766 the Phillips tenant William Prendergast started mob actions along the Hudson that would affect both the Livingston clan and the other patroon families' holdings. At his trial, Prendergast said that he was charged more for his small farm than were all the other Phillips tenants. It didn't matter. He was found guilty of treason and 86 piracy. A merry and a short life ordered, hanged, drawn, and quartered in the feudal fashion of the lords of the Hudson manors. When no one would come forward to perform the execution, Prendergast received a stay and finally a pardon from King George III. King George disappointed the Phillips family a second time by losing the War of Independence. The Phillipses were part of a New York contingent that declared their loyalty to the king and signed the Declaration of Independence. Frederick Phillips III was arrested by Washington's troops, and so he fled his home. Washington confiscated the lands. The Morris family somehow ended up with 1/3 of the original grant. Tenant farmers were allowed to buy the farms on the other 2/3 after the Revolution. Some of the Phillipses fared better than Frederick. Like the Livingstons, some fled to England after the war, while others managed to avoid being branded as Tories and stayed in the colonies. Also like the Livingstons, at least one Phillips heir would marry into the Roosevelt family. Another Phillips heir, Jacobus Goulart, started his own landed dynasty that eventually united with the Gardner families. Jacobus Goulart had been raised by Frederick Phillips, the lord of the manor. Peter Goulart, the grandson of Jacobus, established himself in business and in politics during the Revolution. Instead of being arrested or deported, Peter Goulart used his close relationship with those in power to remain in New York and prosper. Golet's relationship with the city controller, Benjamin Romaine, allowed the Golet clan to acquire real estate as favorably as had the Astors, and other large-scale investors like the Rhinelanders, Schermerhorns, and Laurelids. Romaine was a failed schoolteacher who found his true calling as an early member of the Tammany Society, which was founded as a fraternal charity for Revolutionary War veterans in 1789 shortly after Washington was inaugurated. Washington's Society of the Cincinnati was for officers only and later for those with aristocratic family lines. The Tammany Society was meant to be for men of all classes, although it quickly emerged as a corrupt organization that helped only a handful to loot government coffers. While the history of New York points skeletons in the closet 87 the finger at Bostweed and others who were the most corrupt, the major beneficiaries, such as New York's first families, emerged with larger fortunes, little criticism, and no criminal or civil penalty for their roles. Golet's two sons married daughters of the Scottish merchant Thomas Buchanan, and furthered the family's rise. The younger Golets founded the Chemical Bank of New York at a time when there was an anti-banking sentiment in New York. It was nearly impossible to get a charter for a bank, so several companies got a charter for a certain type of business, and then later amended the original charter. New York Chemical Manufacturing Company was a small company formed to produce dyes, paints, and drugs. 1 year after getting a charter for this business it became a bank. Chemical Bank counted several generations of Golets on the board of directors. The next Golet generation would collect fortunes topping the $100 million mark when the lands, including Union Square and Fifth Avenue, appreciated. Families like the Golets, Astors, and Rhinelanders became old New York, as they owned so much property, and their fortune grew with the population of the city. When Newport, Rhode Island, began to attract the likes of the Astors and the Vanderbilts, the Golets too built their own mansion. Golet daughters married well,